is Don Jorgensen. Welcome to our discussion on issues and candidates. With me today in the studio is Catherine Messner, candidate for State Senate from District 14, including Londonderry, Hudson, and Auburn. Ms. Messner, while a newcomer to politics, comes to us with a great deal of experience in the private business sector. She has chosen this time to step up to the added responsibility of elected office. Ms. Messner, may I call you Kate?
Yes.
Thank you. Welcome and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
For those who do not know you well, perhaps you would tell us a little bit about your family background.
That's fine. My mother her background is Swedish on her side. Her mother came right over from Sweden on the boat, pregnant with her.
Good Scandinavian. I'm in favor of that.
And I can only imagine what that transportation would have been like on a lower level, full with child. So she came over with nothing. Her husband was already here, my mom's dad, and she went knocking. She had no skills. Went knocking door to door in Manhattan. She could clean and she could cook. So she went knocking door to door. She got a little odd job here and a little odd job there, and then word of mouth. You know, people would tell their friends, and she actually got to where she had some celebrities that she worked for.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's a story, and it's true. She came home one day and said to my mother, when my mother was young, "I got a job," in the Swedish accent. And Mom said, "You got a job? Good, good. What is it?" And she said, "I'm working for a boogeyman." And my mother said, You're working for who? She said, "The boogeyman. You know the boogeyman. Everybody know the boogeyman." Humphrey Bogart.
Oh, gee.
Humphrey Bogart, yeah.
Oh,
and that's a true story. Her dad was a builder, carpenter, worked with his hands, and he was actually part of the crew that built the George Washington Bridge.
Oh, really?
And to this day, whenever we go over the George Washington Bridge, if my mother's in the car,
yes,
"My father built this bridge single-handed."
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, it's fascinating. But we only talked about your mother's side, so I suspect that there's some interesting stories on your father's side as well?
There are, yes. And his side is from Germany and also over from Europe. His father came over from Germany with 4 brothers, so they were the 5 Messner brothers, and they were musicians in the New York area, and they were in the big band era, and 3 of them went on to become band leaders of the big band era. They did the hotel circuit in Manhattan. And the youngest one was Johnny Messner, and he's the most famous, and he carried on the longest. And you can actually find his clips of him on YouTube with that very old music.
Oh, really?
Like "Don't Sit Under the Apple Tree."
I love it.
Yeah.
In terms of your father, obviously the 5 brothers issue, et cetera, and musicians, what did your father end up doing then?
He served in the Navy and got a chemical engineering degree from Columbia.
GI Bill.
Yes. And he was, so he was good on the technical side and the science side, but he was also good on the writing side and the arts side. So he found his niche in industrial advertising, like Mad Men. And that worked out very, very well. He was great there, and he actually participated in bringing to market some first-time products, like GE was coming out with the first engineering-grade plastic, which was a polycarbonate, which was Lexan. And that was the very first, and then, of course, the plastics industry just boomed. Yeah. And another one was PerkinElmer, a New England company. He did the very first advertising for them on a brand new gas chromatograph, which, normally I would have no idea what that is. And it's really ironic that I ended up several years later when I was growing up working for a company that I came to find out what that is.
Wonderful, excellent. Well, clearly, he was hardworking.
Very hardworking.
And I have a sense he kind of passed that on to you, along with some business acumen, which probably led to his success, being intelligent and hardworking. And are your parents still with us?
They are. They are. I'm
Wonderful.
very fortunate. They have been married 65 years
Really?
and live in the same home I grew up in, which is very nice. My dad is still working to some extent. He'll tell you he works 3 jobs at 86. He's still involved with the Messner Marketing Communications, which my brother has really taken over pretty much, but he's still involved with that. And he works in a band, playing for weddings and things like that, and volunteers at hospitals, and the old folks absolutely love it. And then his primary job now is teaching piano. And he teaches to 36 students of all different ages at 86 years old.
My God, I'd be happy if I get out of bed at that point,
I think he likes being able to say he has 3 jobs at 86.
Yes, I think that may have some impact. How does your mother address that?
Oh, they've been together 65 years. And so close. They have lived together, they've been married that whole time, no breaks. They have worked together. She worked for him when he brought the business home and started the business home, the Messner Marketing Communications. And I don't know how they do it, but they do it.
Well, they've obviously found great comfort in like minds, et cetera. Now, okay, on a side note, did the music gene get passed down to their daughter?
Yes. I
Right.
actually played violin for a long time when I was growing up, and then I played piano while the kids were growing up, and I was home with the kids. Kept me sane.
I can understand that. Wonderful. I have similarity there too because I had a sister that did the same thing. She was, piano was her life, and vocal as well. But enough of me. Kate, those stories are great, and I thank you very much for sharing them. At this point, however, we're discussing your candidacy for state senate. So perhaps you could talk a bit about your professional background.
Okay. My background is all in the private sector, in business. And as I hinted before, I have actually found myself in companies that manufacture scientific equipment, which was, a fluke, but I have loved it. One was a company that manufactured infrared spectrometers, and another was a software development company that developed software for those different infrared spectrometers and gas chromatographs and mass spectrometers and scientific equipment. And another was industrial lasers, which are used for just about everything now. Scribing, cutting, welding, you name it. And then also cryogenics.
Really?
Yes, but we did not freeze any heads, I promise you. But what we did do is we made equipment that brings the sample down to very, very low temperatures, which requires a vacuum, which is hard to do because nature abhors a vacuum. But the advantage of bringing it down to those Kelvin levels is at the higher levels, there's a lot of noise from electrons, and at the lower level, it's very clear. So they can discover things and see things that they otherwise wouldn't. And this is fundamental research, mostly done by universities. And the things that they find with this type of equipment will go on and be used in just about everything. Cell phones, electronics, you name it. So this is at the very fundamental level, which is fascinating. I worked with some outstanding people who were really renowned in their field. It was quite rewarding.
Outstanding. With that background, why politics and why now?
Well, mostly because I got bitten by the bug. the political bug.
Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, my son was field director for Jean Shaheen's Senate run.
Ah, okay.
And like any mother wanting to give some support to her son, and they're always in need of volunteers, I said, yes, all right, fine. I'll go door to door with you and not, talk about the candidate to the voters. And we had a great response, and I really enjoyed it. There were some homes that, were less off, and some homes that were better off, some more fortunate, some less fortunate. But to talk with people one-on-one, and having my son there was just, I'm a mom.
Any pride?
But it was just so rewarding, again, to talk one-on-one with people and hear their concerns and see how they live. And so I just stayed involved. I got involved in the Hudson Democrats and stayed involved and have been involved ever since, involved with campaigns and all that sort of thing. Now, as for why now, with my involvement in the Hudson Democrats, I found out that there was no opposition to this candidate, the incumbent who's been there for 2 terms. And I said, that's not right. There should be, the voters should have a choice.
Well, and I appreciate that. I'm going to take us back a little bit, though, when you said you were going door to door. I know a lot of people absolutely hate
And I thought I
that
would.
type of activity. So I'd like to find out, how did you find the people you called on? Generally respectful and interested and interesting, or not so much?
Well, both, certainly both, but very often totally, I don't want to use the word negatively, but ignorant, totally not knowing anything about politics and really not wanting to. Too often, and that really bothered me. But I could understand, because that's how I had been all my life until this son got into this. So
Until your son took you down that garden path,
exactly,
right?
exactly. So it was upsetting to see so many people not invest themselves in the process, in democracy. So that has shaped a lot of my involvement.
I can understand that very definitely. Now, you had experience door to door and dealing with people, and obviously it relates to the issue of voter participation, which you kind of touched on. But I'm concerned today we have seen a big push for a voter ID law. And what I'd like to know, what do you think about it, and how do you think it will impact voter participation, which you're suggesting is extremely important?
Yeah. I am against the new voter ID laws. To me, they go absolutely opposite of the way we should be going. We should be encouraging participation from the average person, the average voter, not giving them obstacles, making it more difficult, restricting vote. It's the complete opposite direction of what we should be doing.
Do you think in that context, obviously there was some motivation for the ID law. Is there any support in the studies that have been conducted over the last 8-10 years that suggests that there's been a lot of voter fraud in this country?
No, the studies have shown that there's been virtually no voter fraud. And it actually makes you wonder, was this really coming from our populace? Or was this coming from elsewhere, an organization like ALEC, which my opponent is actually involved in? Because I don't think this is coming from us. A better example of that is when you look at the first bill that was passed by this legislature, the very first bill they passed was the right to carry concealed weapons into the State House. Was that your highest priority?
Not mine.
It certainly wasn't mine, and I doubt it was the highest priority of most of the citizens of Hudson, Londonderry, and Auburn. But it was their highest priority, and maybe it was the NRA's highest priority coming through ALEC.
Well, over the past 20 months, we've seen that our state Senate has actively addressed many issues. What is your general opinion of their legislation? And we'll set aside the voter ID law since you've already addressed that. And my sense is you aren't really a fan of the gun law that was the first law that was imposed, or don't think that should be the priority.
I don't think that should be the highest priority. It's interesting because contrast that first bill from our last legislature with the president's first bill, which was, do you remember?
I thought it was healthcare.
No, Lilly Ledbetter.
Oh, that's right.
Lilly Ledbetter, equal
you're
pay for equal work. Now, that's something I can relate to as
Sure.
a divorced mother. I
Right.
want my hard work to earn just as much money as my male counterparts.
Sure.
So, look at the difference there. It's priorities. I have nothing against gun use. My son-in-law is a hunter, and I wouldn't. It's not for me, but I wouldn't take that pleasure away from him for anything. But I
choice.
don't think it's the first priority, the highest priority, the very first bill. That to me suggests outside influence.
So what I'm hearing is you're not all that confident that the legislature is the voters' needs first in their mind.
Exactly. I don't think it's local.
Well, you gave us an example of the first bill was guns, not jobs, which was what was promised, and the suggestion that maybe perhaps outside organizations are setting the agenda in our state. I know for a fact that most people are not familiar with ALEC or referenced ALEC. Could you tell us a bit about it?
Sure. It is funded by major corporations, and it's a large group, a nationwide group, starting back in the Reagan years. And what they have become, like most other things, it probably had a very nice, well-intended purpose, but what it has become is a lobbying group. That's its purpose, although it is a charitable organization. It's funded totally by industry, and it crafts bills, and it offers scholarships to legislators to come to these events at plush hotels, wine and dine them at no cost, and virtually hands them the bills that are advantageous to them. And the legislature comes back and puts it on the desk of the Senate in our state, or the House in our state.
Interesting. Now,
There's a lot of information on that. You can find it online if you look up ALEC, anybody.
and that was what I was going to ask, where could people get some information? Has there been any recent television programs on
Yes,
it? Is
yes.
there anything?
Actually, Bill Moyer just did a great program called The United States of ALEC.
Oh,
And
okay.
if you look that up on the internet, you'll find that. And there's also a group that's has a website, alecexposed.org.
Oh, okay.
And on my website, which is catherinemessner.com, a little 2.5-minute a video clip from YouTube that is an animation that goes very quickly, easily, and pictorially about the process.
Gotcha. Now, ALEC is obviously an acronym standing for?
American Legislative Exchange Council.
Ah,
I'm glad you said that. I thought we covered that.
No, I did not. And that was set up in the Reagan era.
Yes.
Okay, and it's become kind of the center for the legislation that's run out through the states by this organization. Okay.
Right.
Now, are there representatives from various political entities and organizations involved in this as well, or is it principally just a
You know,
corporate
that I'm
activity?
not sure, to tell you the truth, but I'm sure that this ALEC agenda got help influencing our state from the Tea Party people and the Free Staters along many lines. And I don't think it's the common people of New Hampshire whose interests are being represented.
Gotcha. Now, let's talk a bit further about that. You obviously see it's a problem. Why do you think it's a problem? I mean, it's out-of-state money, I understand, but how do you see that as being a problem to the state?
It's a problem because of the enormity of it, first of all. The amount of funds that this group has, it's buying democracy, which shouldn't be for sale. But more importantly, it's the wrong people making the decisions. This is our state, and we ought to make our own decisions on our legislation. And we are citizen-led, which is probably another reason why Alec thought they'd come in here. But it's the wrong people making the decisions, and it's the wrong people making the decision for the wrong reasons.
For money.
For money.
And power and influence, gotcha.
I mean, there are some big projects coming up for Londonderry, some big building projects. What would you like to see? Would you like to see the population of Londonderry, the townspeople, decide what's the best way to handle those projects? Or would you like to see the company that's providing the most money to get what they want in?
I see where you're going with that. Now, what are some of the solutions for that, do you think?
Well, one thing is, I'm really surprised to hear from the average person that legislators don't often meet with town councils and selectmen. So there's one thing right there. Make a policy of meeting regularly with your town committees.
Mm-hmm.
So that there can be open discourse and everybody knows what's going on. That's the first thing, because if somebody else has brought the bill to you, nobody's involved.
Sure.
in the town.
At the town level.
Except when you present it and sell it, but they've already done that for you. So,
Question for you. What about having legislators meeting in open public meetings on a frequent basis?
Oh, absolutely.
Would that help as well?
Absolutely, yes,
Okay.
yes. And I'd like to see the libraries utilized for this purpose. I think the library is a wonderful place. Every town has one, and it's a place that people can go to learn things. I'd like to see them learn democracy.
Sure.
And how to participate.
Yeah, I have some issues with democracy being correlated to being, shall we say, bought, because that to me isn't democracy, it's
Exactly.
a plutocracy.
Exactly.
And we all know how deadly that is in terms of the betterment of people in the society and how people get left off in the process or left out in the process. In terms of this also, how do you see the makeup of our legislature? Do you think that should be?
That's another point, yes. I think the legislature ought to mirror the citizenry.
Sure.
So, right now there are 51, I think it's 51% women, and
On the national level.
on the national level. I'm sure the state level is probably
Pretty close.
And the legislature is really predominantly older white men. I have nothing against older white men. I'm dating one now. But
Yeah, I kind of think I'm one myself,
but it should be representative of the people. There are Latinos in our communities. There are not very many blacks and African Americans, but there are some. And it should be representative of the people.
So you're saying the legislature should reflect to some degree the population as well.
Yes, absolutely.
It has to start at the very bottom. I mean, it has to start with new faces.
Mm-hmm.
Are you seeing any of that happening anywhere?
I'm very encouraged with seeing some young people right here in Londonderry. Ted Combs and Brian Merrill are both running for House Rep, and they're both very well educated, very hardworking. I don't think they're both Eagle Scouts, but I think Ted is.
Yes.
Great guys, and their youth bringing their perspective,
Sure.
which I think is absolutely essential. The youth have totally different challenges than we do, and they need to be represented.
No doubt. And I hear a lot of people that are, shall we say, my age, which is substantially older than you, saying that I wouldn't want to be a young person today. I wouldn't want to go through those challenges that they're facing. It was tough enough when we were young, let alone for.
Right.
What are some of the other areas that you would like to see improvement in?
Well, jobs certainly, but I actually think that jobs is the product, or will be the product, if we invest in healthcare, education, and infrastructure. And on the healthcare side, I want to make 2 points, real clear. One thing that must be included is reproductive rights. We must retain our reproductive rights, and women need to be able, in the 21st century, we need to be able to decide when we want to have our families. That's paramount. Birth control needs to be an accepted part of plans, health plans, not an extraneous one. I have a daughter who had to take birth control for medical reasons at a very young age, not for sexual purposes, for medical reasons. I'm sure she's not the only one in that category.
No, I know that.
But I think if you have a few more women in the legislature, there might be one who's familiar with this situation and bring it to the table.
Interesting.
So that's the care. The education, I believe in restoring education. I think it's a shame that we cut as much as we did the funding for education. We were the last in the nation. We were the lowest in the nation of states providing funding for higher ed. And the last legislature cut that lowest level in half. What can our universities do at that level? So I don't know to what level we can restore it, but I think we've got to change our outlook on education. We've got to look at education as not merely kindergarten keep all the way through college, but we have to look at education as lifelong learning, because things change so quickly. And if we're going to have people in the workforce longer, they're going to need skills, new skills, all the time. So we need to change the way we look at education, and we have to factor that in our plans.
Absolutely, and that makes ultimate sense. So the bottom line is to make sure that we have a structure in place that supports people so that they can get the education that they need and be as productive as possible in an extraordinarily competitive world that this world is in fact becoming rapidly.
Absolutely, and I
And
can
at the
really
bottom
relate
of that,
to that.
education.
I can really relate to that because of the companies I've worked for. I've worked for companies that have hired PhD chemists and physicists from abroad, and it's not because there aren't any here. It's because they're cheaper.
Sure.
Even to bring them over, pay for their visa, and get them started.
Well, that brings up another issue. One of the things that we've noticed is that we've seen very obviously is that in the past, government has given substantial tax breaks to companies that have shifted their work overseas. What's your sense of that?
It's awful. It's because the impact is that the companies shut down, and there's no more work for United States citizens. I was laid off one time, and I was on the phone getting support from the bank, dealing with who am I going to pay and who am I not going to pay? How can I get this arranged? And I knew darn well the person that was on the other end was from India. This is nothing against immigrants. I've already told you about my immigrant background, but that hurts. That hurts. It's disconcerting when you're laid off, and you've been laid off because of this growing trend of outsourcing jobs.
Well, in that context, and we just have about a minute left, so what about tax penalties for companies that ship jobs off?
I absolutely would support tax penalties, and I think our president would too, and I think he will institute that if he gets back in, and he gets people who will work with him.
Sure. Kate, today we've discussed only a few issues. We've got about a minute left here. Are there any other comments that you would like to make in that period? Basically, the camera is yours if you wish.
Okay. Well, I love this state. I've loved New England since I was a little kid coming up here for camp. And I would really honor the chance to represent the three towns of Hudson, Londonderry, and Auburn. And I would keep the concerns local, and I would listen, because I don't feel that I have all the answers being a newcomer. I would listen to the concerns with an open ear. That's
Well, thank you for that. And Kate Messner, thank you very much for joining us today and giving the citizens of our town the opportunity to hear what you have to say.
Thank you.
I think that's extraordinarily important for all of us to know that. And I thank you very much for joining us. To the audience, thank you for joining us, and have a very good night.